Good day, my dear friends. Welcome to Hippie Cooks. You guys are always asking for more hippie cooks, and I enjoy doing them. They're just a little difficult and time consuming, but I love to cook. I really do, friends. So today, you've already read the title. Today we're doing steak and baked potato. Sounds like a pretty simple thing, but I am using a conglomerate of techniques that I have learned in watching a whole bunch of different YouTube videos and other types of shows. Mostly between Alton Brown and Gordon Ramsay, I have learned most of what you're about to see me do. So what do we need to start with? First, we're preparing the steak. We are going to cure it, and although we can't do an overnight cure, this exact cure can be done the day before or even up to 3 days before cooking the steak. The longer it cures, the better it tastes. Definitely, you'll see. We need steak, and oh my goodness, this is big steak. I asked the woman who was doing the shopping for me to make sure that she got 3 New York strips. We need cutting board. We need some shrink wrap or some other form to wrap the steak in, because again, I just bought this steak and it is morning. I'm going to cure it, and I'm going to cook it around 5 or 6 tonight. That'll give it quite a few hours to cure, and it's really going to work well. You could do it days before. You also need some kosher salt. Of course, you could use regular salt, but come on. We need a good, strong poking device. I think they call this a fork. And you should have a good chef's knife. I call that a knife. That's a knife, my friends, and it's a good chef's knife if your finger here balances it. And see, that is not, it's fair. It's fair. Friends, pitter patter, let's get at her. Let's open up this steak, see it up close, and start working on it, because it isn't as simple as salt your steak and wrap it. Take the steak out. Oh my goodness. Look at this steak. Make sure your hands are well washed. Mine are. Big fat cap on there. Couple of reasons. 1, fat's good for you. 2, it tastes bloody delicious. I learned that from Gordon Ramsay. And 3, it adds so much flavor to the meat itself. Even if you don't want that fat, let it cook with the fat. Cut the fat off later. I will, probably this steak, be cutting the fat off. It has the least amount of fat, and my boy Pasha, so far, he hasn't developed that taste for fat. And always have a cloth. I usually use paper towel, but you know what's handier is having, I've learned this too from watching Hell's Kitchen, is have a cloth shoved into your pocket. And that way at any time you can just grab it, clean your hands, and get moving on with this again. But I do take off some big corner pieces of fat that aren't going to do any good for me. I mean, trim it the way you want to trim it. This one that I'll use for Pasha, I definitely want it nice and cut down from fat. Saves a lot of work later. And also, I'm barbecuing these. A lot of fat means a lot of smoke, means a lot of fire, means a lot of charring instead of browning and caramelizing. So you do want excess to trim off. But not bad, folks. There's the fat that I've trimmed from this. And it's beautiful for cooking your eggs in and stuff like that. You can just melt it down. Now, we have 3 beautiful steaks. And what we got to do is take every steak and fill it full of holes. I use this. You want to, you're tenderizing somewhat, but what you're making sure is that you're curing, that while you're curing it, and yes, let that fork go through the fat. You only need about 10 pokes per. Turn it and poke again. Now be careful of your hand, eh? So far I've been lucky. I have never hit my hand. Knock on wood. So continue on. Fill in your steak full of holes. Now get used to this because we're going to do this with the baked potato too. Now if your steak is only half an inch thick or thinner, I feel sorry for you. No, sorry. If your steak is only a ½ inch thick, you do not need to throw that fork through that. This is not really, this is going to be a tender steak anyway, but what we're doing is providing a path for the salt, the kosher salt, to work its way into the meat and develop that beautiful cured flavor. So once you've poked it full of holes, I did both sides, okay? Now take your kosher salt and salt it generously, folks. Don't be scared of salt on your steak, especially a really thick steak like this.
It's going to take a while to get through.
Salt that fat cap, turn it over, salt the other side, salt the edges. Make sure that salt is all around this.
Pat it down, get it everywhere.
Now friends, I am going to, you don't have to watch this, now I'm going to wrap these steaks. Keep the air away from it. Oxygen is not your friend. Keep the air away from it. Wrap each one separately. Put them in the fridge and let them just sit. They're going to sit inside their own juices. You could also, if you really want to kind of dry brine it, you could, instead of wrapping it, you could put it on a grate, on a cookie sheet on a grate, and put it at the bottom of the fridge. It'll dry up on the outside, and especially if you're going a couple of days, it may even crust up on the outside, but that's still really good. You just cut those pieces off and continue on. I prefer a little bit of a wet brine. It's going to keep the juices inside the steak, but that's up to you. We'll be back a little later today as we start working on the potatoes. That was quite a wait. Well, for you guys, it was half a second, split second, whatever you want to call it. Friends, now it's time to start getting busy and start getting cooking. And the steaks are still in the fridge. It's time to do the potatoes now. And this is something I learned. I gotta give the shout out to Alton Brown. Alton Brown baked potatoes. Look them up or watch. Very, very simple, but the best baked potato. I've never done any other baked potato. All you need is salt, a bit of olive oil, and your trusty potatoes. Take your potatoes, clean them good, and just remove, I just removed one little piece there. Remove what you aren't willing to eat because this skin is beautiful. I use russet potatoes, really good for baking. First thing to do is to put a few holes. Remember, just like we did with the steak. Here, let me
put this down. We are going to, you watch your hand. You want to put a few holes along every part of this potato. Just get maybe, this isn't a really big potato, so 6 or 7 holes per potato, maybe 2 per side. You just, I have once come close to stabbing myself and I worry about that, but that's just to get all the cooking all the way through, make a nice even baked potato. I promise you it would be the best you ever had. And then, once you've got these holes put through,
a little bit of olive oil. And the way I do it, my friends, put it in your hand. Now, Alton Brown showed it putting it in a bowl and drizzling the olive oil over and then the salt and then shaking it. I prefer to get my hands in there, rub the oil into it, and then simply get a whole bunch of good kosher salt all over it. I'm going to make a mess. I know, that's okay. And it's okay to put a little bit of regular salt on the outside. I've made quite a mess here. Normally it doesn't make this much of a mess. This is ready now. We're going to put this in a preheated oven, 350 degrees. We're going to put them direct on the grill, on the sheet, whatever. Put a cookie sheet under them. Don't put them on a cookie sheet. On the second panel, put a cookie sheet there just to catch any drippings, or a nice big sheet of tin foil. There isn't going to be a lot of drippings, but there will be some because we're just putting this raw potato direct on the grill. And set your timer for 1 hour. It takes 1 hour for these potatoes. This is perfect. There's a little bit more to the story, so stay tuned as to how I finish off these potatoes. But they're going in the oven now, and in 30 minutes, when there's 30 minutes left on these, I'm going to start cooking the onions and heating up the barbecue to get that big thick steak, because it's going to take a while to cook. I'll be back in 30 minutes. Peace. And here we are now, half an hour later, and this time travel is getting tiring. Friends, now it's time to get busy with the onions, get the barbecue started. It's all about timing, and this is one of those meals that is very forgiving. So first, get your pan, put a couple of tablespoons of virgin olive oil, heat her up to hot. You want to start it off hot. And then get your onions ready. Here we go. Knifey. Cut off the edges. Get rid of all that extra. Take off the first level. I usually take a couple off because just gives you the fresher part of the onion. I could have done this ahead of time for y'all, but then you see what I'm doing. I'm learning slowly from a book that my son bought me from Gordon Ramsay about learning how to cook. I'm learning slowly how to properly peel and cut and use proper knife cuts and all that kind of stuff. So here we are, 2 pieces of onion. Cut it down long, put them with the root at the far distance. Same here, same thing. And I start with one in the front and just cut away. And I let the root go away. That's too big. And by not cutting that piece, this will not be as difficult on the eyes when you're cutting. If your root ends up being a good size, keep it.
And the last half. Practice your knife skills. The better you can get at it, the less dangerous it becomes.
Now we take this over to the oil, knock some things over, and that nice sizzle. This is going to cook for 30 minutes, friends. And we're going to add a little bit of salt, table salt, a little bit of sugar. I do not add the pepper till much later. Turn the temperature down just a little. And now I have some garlic from my fridge. Take a few cloves because onion tastes so much better with garlic. But the garlic does, if you cook it for half an hour, you are going to end up with burnt garlic. So now we're going to take each clove and just apply some pressure till you feel it break under you. You're just squishing it. You can hear that. What you want to do is break that garlic, and that forces it into releasing the allicin, and that's where the flavor comes from. So friends, we're going to let that garlic sit while I go out and preheat the barbecue and stir these onions, and then I'll be back to you when it's ready to put the steak on the barbie. Now we're preparing the meat to put on the barbie, so let's move the cutting board aside. Let that garlic continue to bloom. Get a new serving plate out because you're going to need something to carry these heavy pieces around. As I said, I individually wrap them in just salt. So we now have to take these out. As you can tell, they're a different color. They've gone a ruby red, and that's the salt breaking down the tissue and creating a much more delicious steak. We now have our steak ready, and now is the time to apply the rest of the seasoning. By the time we get this started, the barbecue will be ready. So now we just want to add a little more salt. Salt never hurts. Throw some salt on there. A good amount of ground pepper. Or fresh grind. I like fresh grind later. Good amount of pepper, and I always add garlic. Barbecue, she's pre-grilled. The steaks are ready to go on. And friends, it's okay, use your hands at first. Hear that sizzle? That's why we're preheating that. Get it to the hottest part of there we go. 3 steaks in a row. And now we're going to close that, and we're going to turn the heat down a little bit. Keep the flame going. These are fatty, and these are really thick. They're going to take a while. I'm going to go 4 minutes on that side, turn them, 4 minutes on the other, turn them. I know some people say only turn twice. I disagree. I've watched a lot with Alton Brown and other people about steak, and continually turning them builds that beautiful texture on the outside of the steak. We will be back. that cook for 15 more minutes. Now it's time to flip and flip and flip the steaks. That's kind of boring, so my friends, I'm not going to keep you there. We'll wait until we're near the end of the steaks outside, because it's kind of crappy filming out there, okay? And we'll get right back to you. The old hippie is sweating. Friends, you get to see my wonderful food. You also get to see my failures. It's not a big failure. I just had the steak closed and only 4 minutes per side, but I came out there and the end cap had caught fire. So one side is nice and dark brown, as my mom used to call it. Nice and dark brown. Anyways, my friends, the onions are pretty well ready. So we're turning that way down and just let them cook, because the steak isn't ready. The steak is charred on the outside, but I just checked the internal temperature. It's only 104, 105. That's not cooked through yet enough. I like it medium, medium rare. That's about 140. So it's got to come up a bit. The oven was set at 350 for the last hour. Those potatoes are cooked. You can tell, just squeeze them, they'll be nice and soft. You can now lower the temp down on the oven to 200. Those potatoes are super forgiving. They're just going to stay nice and hot. They're not going to overcook. The outside of that potato is so thick and crispy. You'll see. We'll be back. Here we are. The steak is out of the barbecue. It has rested 10 minutes. And it is just a little, well, this is Pasha's, and I would say it is medium. I was going for medium rare. I'd rather medium than rare. And I'm cutting this up just to help them, but look how buttery it cuts. I'll be right back, and I'll be plating a plate, and then we'll get busy eating. We are at the final part of plating, and the final trick that Alton Brown taught is take your fork that we used before on the potato. Careful, these potatoes are really hot. And just keep poking straight down the center to make a cut. Then I use mitts because it's too hot right now. Then just squeeze that potato together, and it opens in the center beautifully. Then you can add a nice big dollop of butter inside it. Let that melt beautifully. Go ahead, add a little bit to the steak. It had some. And then, my friends, nice big chunk, or 3 of sour cream, a little pepper, and yes, my friends, just a final touch of salt. Let's go eat. Let's see what this is like. Peace. And we start with the right view, the steak and the potatoes ready for consumption, and the final, us having a taste. My first cut of this steak. Remember, this is the thickest steak I've ever made, so it's a little overcooked. Better that than undercooked. Cheers. Friends, even that end piece was chewy and soft and wonderful. And now the Alton Brown hippie-ish potato. Cheers. Always get some on the mustache. So soft, so fluffy. The outside skin so salty and crunchy. And one last thing, my friends, we've got to try is I have some creamy horseradish to go with the meal. Cheers. It's a big mouthful. So thanks for watching Hippie Cooks. Pasha, are you enjoying?
Yep.
Gertie, how is it? Everyone's mouth is too full to talk. That means it went well. So peace and cheers. Love and harmony. We'll see you again.